What's the trashiest wedding you've ever been to? I went to a wedding that my wife and I said would not last more than 2 years. The wedding was in the backyard of the bride's house. They had all the chairs and wedding arch set up outside. They set up a plastic tarp running down the aisle to walk on. Just before the wedding started, dark clouds appeared. It should have been a sign to move the wedding inside, but they invited too many people to the damn thing. Just as they started the wedding, it began to rain lightly. The father of the bride was walking the bride down the lane and slipped on the wet tarp, falling on his back. The bride was now at the front, and it was raining harder. People started to cover up with whatever they had. Some people even started to get up. The bride turned around and said to all, "This is my wedding. No one is going to ruin it. You better all friggin' sit your A down." We all sat back down and the wedding resumed. It was now raining pretty hard. The grass was turning into mud. A few ladies in the crowd, and the bridesmaids, had makeup running down their faces. My wife had taken my jacket as a cover from the rain. They finished the vows and kissed, and then everyone ran to the house and garage to get out of the rain. Oh, remember how I said the grass had turned to mud? Yeah, lots of people slipped and fell in it on the way to the house. We got to the house, and many people looked terrible from the running makeup, muddy clothing, and being soaking wet. A few of the women had to cover their chests and waists because wet clothing had become see-through. Most of the men were loaning their coats to the ladies to cover up. Dirty looks were everywhere. The wedding cake had been outside and was now brought in. The rain had made the decorations on the cake runny, and it looked horrible. The bride and groom began to cut the cake and feed each other. They smashed cake pieces into each other's faces, then started a full-on food fight. My friend's wife got hit in the face with purple icing, and it splattered on her dress. The priest got hit with yellow icing on his white robe. There was nothing left of the cake to serve. The food being served was either still frozen in the middle or, for the parts that were not frozen, burned. The dessert was supposed to be the cake, but as mentioned above, there was nothing left. There was a goodie bag for people on the way out, which contained a lollipop, a coupon for an ice cream cone at McDonald's, a pencil with the bride and groom's names on it, and Halloween-size M&Ms. My wife, whose dress was filthy, her makeup was ruined, and her hair a mess, told me she did not want to see those people again for 6 months. She was so mad. The couple divorced 11 months later when the groom came home from work and found his wife with 2 guys. Story 2. Oh man, I'm a retired wedding DJ and I've seen some crap. The one that takes the cake, though, would be this low-budget thing that got handed to me from another DJ. The wedding itself was low budget, but we got paid well, oddly. It was at this town hall in a little farm community. The venue was falling apart, and they had me positioned in this balcony-type area that had a near vertical set of stairs to access. It was hot, humid, and a total disaster. Dinner consisted of way overcooked, crappy cuts of beef, more so resembling shoe leather than meat, a slop of potatoes and creamed corn, plastic table cloths, and disposable plates and utensils, just setting the stage. No real speeches except the bride and groom who did them separately, not together. Bride gets up, mentions how she basically stole this guy from some other bish and who's laughing now. My jaw was almost on the floor. Groom gets up and says, and I quote, "So I guess I have to make a speech. I laid out some lines before I got up here, but they're up my nose now, so I guess that's about all I got." He left the stage with his hands up like he was a world champ of something. Half the crowd was going nuts, the other half in disbelief. A beer bong showed up. The bride had a bottle of vodka poured on her, then licked up by any guy. One of the bridesmaids got blasted in the loft where I was set up by someone other than her husband and boyfriend, and I'm pretty sure had a train run on her later that night. I would be shocked if there was one person who wasn't seriously drunk getting behind the wheel as I was packing up. Ended up calling the cops to report it because screw drunk drivers. As I left, I saw a few cruisers up the street. Keep in mind, this is farm country, with a few cars pulled over. Seriously, trash. Honorable mentions go to bride, who we caught banging one of the groomsmen in the back hallway of the banquet hall where they kept the extra chairs. Endless instances of drunk aunts, mothers, and bridesmaids grabbing at my dong as they pretended to make a request, oftentimes telling me the room they're in and to come meet them. When I'm done, the chick who was able to fit the microphone in her mouth then proceeded to give it a solid 10 seconds of blowy. Some dude who got so drunk he pissed on the wall behind the buffet table in a fake plant. More flashes than I can count. Drunk old men hitting on bridesmaids. Drunk old women hitting on groomsmen. List goes on. Story 3. Went to my friend's cousin's wedding as his date. Everything went okay until the preacher opened his mouth. I knew beforehand that the church was Baptist, deep Southern Baptist church, but hey, free cake and a reason to wear a cute dress. I tuned most of his ramblings out until I heard the word S. I perked up because, really? Did I just hear S come from this old dude's mouth? Yeah, I did. He went on to say things like, "Y'all better not have had S already. That's a sin." And, A woman is to be submissive to her husband in all things, even in the bedroom. I kind of looked at my friend like, what the heck is going on? There were literally children here, and the bride and groom both looked very uncomfortable. They were both shy people. Still not the worst. The preacher then nudges the groom and says something like, bet you guys are going to get started on that baby right after the reception. The bride looked absolutely mortified, her blush running all the way down to her chest. There were some other parts where he mentioned S and what the Bible says about it, and it was all very awkward. Also, it didn't help that the pastor was this old, wrinkled dude with a long, slow southern drawl. On the way to the reception, I asked my friend why they chose that preacher, since it didn't seem like the couple knew half of what he was going to talk about. The preacher was the groom's father. Story 4. The first wedding of a college roommate was pretty trashy in my opinion. Background info, the bride was really young. I think she had just turned 18 a few days before the wedding. They fought over their vows. For months before this wedding, he wanted to make up their own. She wanted prefab. You wouldn't believe how heated this argument got night after night. My date and I got to the church with barely a minute to spare. We were ushered in by someone's flustered family member who clearly didn't appreciate that we were walking in as the ceremony was about to start. The first thing I noticed, no real church music was playing. It was all Kenny G. I groaned and rolled my eyes because my roommate thinks Kenny G is high-class music. I saw my friends and took a seat. The very first thing whispered to me was, I wonder who won. We all laughed. The procession of grandparents began. This was the longest procession I've ever sat through. I felt like I was there for 30 minutes. How many grandparents do 2 people have? Next, my roommate's cousin brothers, oh yes, this is true, came tumbling down the aisle as flower boys and ring bearers, looking like they were doing some crappy version of Brazilian martial arts dancing. They didn't give a crap. In fact, no one did. Not one of the 300 grandparents stepped in to whisk them to their seats. After that ludicrous display, we waited 10 minutes before the forgettable wedding party decided to grace us with their presence. Don't forget, this entire time, the same 10-hour Kenny G song was playing, or maybe it was a bunch of different Kenny G songs. Who can tell? The entire wedding party made it to the front. We waited, and we waited, and waited, and waited, listening to Kenny G. A toothless redneck on the bride's side stood up and yelled, "She ain't coming! Hey, everybody, she ain't coming!" I cracked up as he was wrestled back into his seat and shushed. We waited some more. The bride still didn't appear. The 10-hour Kenny G song mercifully came to an end, and that's when the organist started playing the bride's music. I couldn't believe it. That bastard purposely made everyone listen to his Kenny G CD in its entirety. He smiled widely as he took his place at the top of the stage. There wasn't an altar. To watch his bride hobble down the aisle like one leg was a foot shorter than the other. People were alarmed. Did the bride hurt herself? Is that why she was late? I asked a friend if our roommates mentioned her injury. Did she break her ankle? He shrugged. Then it happened. My roommate suddenly started flailing in a weird, overdramatic way until he produced a woman's shoe wedged in his right pocket. In sweeping, large movements, he held the shoe up on one hand, then knelt in front of her to slip it onto her bare foot. I guess that explained the hobbling. I zoned out for most of the ceremony until the minister announced it was time for them to say their vows. Everyone in our group leaned forward in excitement. Here it was. We'd finally know who won after months of nasty fights. He said the bride and groom had written their own vows. Ooh, my roommate proceeded with a rambling monologue. That put Jimmy Valmer's 12 Days of Christmas to shame. The minister turned to the bride, who loudly said she forgot her vows. Everyone in our group gave some silent oohs. My roommate couldn't hide how pissed off he was. He glared at her the entire time she said her vows to him. The minister finished and told my roommate he could kiss the bride. Despite being angry, he started with his hilarious theatrics again. To prepare for the big kiss, he fully extended both arms with his right hand on the bride's cheek and his left arm slightly raised behind him. He held this pose for a few seconds, then grabbed her waist and pulled her in for a Hollywood-style dip. Some guests oohed and awed. I lost it. My date tried to elbow me for rudeness, but then the Kenny G exit music triggered even more laughter. There was a 1 to 2 hour break between the ceremony and the reception, which took place in a dingy Elks Lodge basement while bingo was being held upstairs. There were tiny little plastic high heels on the tables filled with mints and a few Disney Cinderella figures scattered about. The bride and groom were an hour late. My roommate excitedly whispered to us that they were late because they had banged in the limo. She was 18 and legal now. By that time, every single plastic shoe was empty. People were even searching empty tables for unattended mints. The bridesmaids ushered the bride to the middle of the tiny dance floor to pin up the back of her dress. As they billowed it to straighten everything out, the back of the dress flipped up too high, giving everyone a full view of the bride's bare A. A bunch of dudes gave my roommate the thumbs up while a gaggle of them formed behind her, waiting for it to happen again. While that was going on, people started putting out the food. I sauntered over to see the spread, a couple of trays of crackers, 2 trays with cheese and those tiny, gross pickles, and 3 huge dishes of canned beanie weenie. I had forgotten that he said he wanted beanie weenie served at his reception. I grabbed my date and headed toward the door. I wish I had stayed for the rest of the show, but my stomach couldn't take it anymore. My friend said there were 2 fights in the parking lot and a few drunken scuffles with other inhabitants of the Elks Lodge because their guests kept raiding the upstairs game. The fighting went on all night. They divorced 2 years later. Story 5. My cousin's wedding was glorious. It took place at a park in Michigan in August. So it was right around 100 degrees and like 80% humidity. Screaming hot, and the air was like breathing soup. Of course, the guests had uncovered metal folding chairs to sit on. It was an afternoon wedding. The bridesmaids wore navy blue velour mini dresses and sparkly silver dancer heels. If you don't know, velour is like a heavy velvet-type fabric, and thin shoe heels are really hard to walk in on grass because they sink in. The groom, Billy the Stump, was standing at the archway with his sunglasses on and his hands in his pockets, rocking back and forth on his heels. The officiant had a word with the best man, who yanked Billy's hands out of his pockets, took his sunglasses off, and told him to stand up straight. The guy in charge of hitting play on the boombox was taking advantage of the beer cooler, Michelob Light, the official beer of classy weddings. They didn't do any sort of fabric for the aisle, just 4 lines of red spray paint in a rectangle. When my cousin started down the aisle, she wasn't wearing a dress so much as a shirt and a skirt, both of which were handmade by my aunt, which would have been fine if either had fit. Her veil was 4 pieces of tulle stapled to a headband. We know because we could see the staples twinkling in the blistering August sunlight. Billy the Stump's grandfather was in attendance, wearing his finest wife beater and blue cotton work pants, the kind with the giant 6-inch cuffs held up with red suspenders, but you could tell it was a formal occasion because he'd put his teeth in, which we knew from him sucking his dentures down and clacking them back into place. When the service was over, the recessional failed to play because the boombox guy was helping himself to another beer. He realized he'd missed his cue and ran over to hit play, and the bride and groom walked up the aisle to "We've Only Just Begun," while their 3-year-old daughter trailed behind. The food was being served in one of the park pavilions. The centerpieces were 3-inch potted plants in the original orange plastic pot on a 4-inch mirror. There was one of these for every 8-foot-long picnic table. Pre-meal nibbles appeared to have been peanuts and M&Ms in those little paper Dixie-type cups, except that this was outside at a park, and the local squirrels had already raided the cups. Fun fact, M&Ms melt in squirrel paws on a hot summer day, but the little multicolored squirrel paw prints all over the tables make a festive addition to any party. Edit. I have just learned that this same cousin brought Jell-O shots to her dad's funeral. The necks just keep getting redder. Story 6. Some hippie friends of my parents got married when I was about 14, and it was a location wedding at some earthy little mountain getaway in Tennessee. Only it was outside and in mid-August, and in Tennessee that's like 90-degree, full humidity weather. But that's okay. Since it was so hot, they decided to do it barefoot in a creek. Well, they had a cage of butterflies to release during the kiss, but as it turns out, they had all died because of the heat. When the big moment came, someone opened the cage dramatically to let them free, and like 2 half-dead butterflies stumbled out, and the rest were shriveled and dead inside. The hippie bride screamed in horror. Story 7. My cousin who, let's say, isn't playing with a full deck and thought that she had hired a caterer. Because she sat at a bar one night and said to this lady, "You should do the food for my wedding." Waited until about an hour after the food should have logically arrived before starting to make some phone calls, only to find out that the caterer was on vacation in Costa Rica and had no idea that the bride thought she was doing food for the wedding. Dominoes to the rescue about 2 hours later. But the reception being at a bowling alley with a keg in the middle of the dance floor was completely planned. Story 8, probably my own. We had planned a lovely wedding, but when it came time to actually put things into motion, I realized there was no way in hell my family and his family needed to be within several miles of each other, much less at the same venue. We decided we would get married with just the 2 of us and the gentleman responsible for the paperwork. We planned a small picnic-style ceremony at a local duck pond with a pretty gazebo. Our minister was a close friend, and we told him to bring his wife and that we would treat them to lunch afterward. The morning of the wedding, we apparently stepped straight into monsoon season. A 20% chance of rain turned into 16 inches of rain overnight with more on the way. We almost could not leave the house because the water was so high. I called our friend and told him to scratch the duck pond idea and asked if he could just meet us in town so no one got washed away. Since we run a farm, the easiest common meeting place we all knew how to find was the local feed store. My husband and I arrived early and went inside to buy the feed we needed. As we came out, our friend arrived and helped load the feed into the back of our truck. It was still pouring rain. I heard something and spotted a 4 or 5-week-old kitten about to be swept into a storm drain. I grabbed it, wrapped it in my jacket, and put it on the passenger seat of our truck before climbing into our friend's Honda Element. Sitting in the back seat, soaking wet and covered in hay and mud, we said our vows and then went our separate ways. That was when my husband learned we had a new cat. It was a complete crap show from beginning to end, but somehow it was perfect. And we have one hell of a story to tell our son someday. Story 9. I got this. Our nanny's best friend was getting married, and my wife and I were invited because we had given that couple a bed and breakfast gift certificate we weren't going to use, and they thought we should be at their wedding as a thank you. Okay, so the day came, and we were sitting in a field on a farm on the hottest day of the year, high 90s. The bride was going to be transported from the house to the altar by horse-drawn carriage for about 2,000 feet on a graded, slanted dirt road. The signal for the carriage to head over was someone unbeknownst to us standing behind the seated guests, who proceeded to blast a 12-gauge shotgun as they all went. The horse reared up and freaked out. The handler tried to regain control, and the horse collapsed. 10 minutes of chaos later, we found out the horse had heat stroke and could not pull the carriage. Instead of forgoing the carriage, the bride's dad walked down to the wedding guests and asked for volunteers to help pull it to the altar. My wife nudged me, and I said, "There is no way I am sticking my toe in that pool of dumb." About 6 people volunteered, including one little person. They all got in place and started to pull the carriage. As gravity and common sense took over, the downhill slope made the carriage uncontrollable. Within 45 seconds, 6 guys were holding on for dear life, sprinting full speed just to avoid getting run over. At one point, the little person was not even touching the ground, but his legs were still in running motion. I will never forget that visual. The carriage came flying down the road, hit the grooves in the dirt, and rolled right into the hay field, stopping about 20 feet from the altar. It was quite literally the funniest thing I had ever seen. Then, to put the icing on the cake, the reception was a non-alcoholic event because the groom's family was super religious, and it was a potluck dinner. We had paid for their cake as our contribution. My wife, being the saint she is, spent $600 on it. The groom, however, pushed the bride's face into it like an 8th grader, giving a 6th grader a swirly in a bathroom stall, destroying the whole thing. Not one piece was served. Oh, but how a store-brand cola can hit the spot when a nice 7 and 7 on a hot summer's day would have been perfect. Total crap show. Story 10. I worked at a very high-end golf club in Seattle that regularly hosted expensive weddings. This Samoan wedding is probably my favorite. All the groomsmen were wearing lime green vests with matching lime green snapbacks. The wedding party was required by contract to order food from the restaurant at the golf club. They ordered Domino's instead, and the pizza guy literally brought them pizza while they sat in the fancy restaurant. The bride and groom got into a fist fight right before the ceremony, delaying it a bit until bruises could be covered with makeup. They hired a live band to play at the reception but didn't feed them. During their first break, the lead singer decided to zoom down the hill to grab some McDonald's for the crew. He was pulled over and arrested for drunk driving. His one call from jail: "I can't play at your wedding anymore. I'm in jail." Story 11. A friend of mine hired me to play music with him at a ceremony, but as is customary in those situations, I didn't know who was getting married until they showed up. Here's the backstory. My wife was working for a corporation, and one of her team members was a guy who was happily married to his high school sweetheart and had 2 young daughters. Another coworker was his best friend, who was single. Let's call the married guy Phil, his wife Kim, and his BFF Tim. Tim was a short, mousy kind of guy who had trouble getting dates, so Phil and Kim used to bring him along to situations where he'd normally be a third wheel, going sailing, going out to eat at nice restaurants, and so on. Phil didn't mind because Tim was such a good friend, and he felt bad that he was lonely. One time, Phil went out of town and suggested that Kim and Tim keep each other company while he was gone. Well, that's exactly what they did. When Phil returned, his high school sweetheart announced that she and Tim were now an item, and Phil was no longer in the picture. So imagine my surprise when the wedding couple showed up and Tim came up to say hello to me. The cringiest part of the whole thing was Tim bringing Phil's daughters into the wedding vows and talking about how he loved them like his own and how he was going to take care of them. Those poor little girls looked like they wanted to crawl under a rock and die. Story 12. Wasn't trashy, but I'm Australian, and I married an Italian. Our venue offered an open bar, including spirits, here in Italy. You can't really get that in Australia without paying an arm and a leg, and there's a reason why. They were not prepared for the Australians. My small army of 20 or so friends drank the equivalent of over 300 people. The venue ran out, and the guy who organized it reckons he made a loss. Until that day, all the Italians thought I was the loudest bish they had ever seen. Then they learned I am actually the quiet one of the group. Story 13. Hands down the worst wedding I've ever been to. My 20 years older step-cousin married a girl from the grade above me in high school that I vaguely knew but wasn't friends with. The pastor went on a 10-minute sermon in the middle of the wedding ceremony about divorce. This was doubly awkward because there were 9 parents present due to multiple parental divorces on both sides. The reception was in the basement of a bowling alley where the bride and groom liked to get drunk. They forewent a receiving line after the ceremony and promised to have one at the beginning of the reception. They were over half an hour late to their own reception. The receiving line never happened, and they never visited with their guests. The entire bridal party showed up at the reception absolutely trashed and only proceeded to get more drunk. It was freezing cold in the reception hall. Most of the guests were over the age of 45. So, of course, they proceeded to play hardcore rock at painful volume that prevented all conversation. The wedding cake was cheesecake with frosting on it. It was cut in such a way that it looked like normal cake. Everyone was unpleasantly surprised when they took their first bite. It was not good cheesecake. The bride got so very drunk that someone tied a balloon to her. Bustle, and she never noticed. She also had a sobbing fit all over my mother about how glad she was that my mom came. She had never met my mother before. Most people bailed about 2.5 hours into the reception after the cake was served. Story 14. The bride and groom weren't actually very interested in each other. He was very wealthy, and she needed financial stability. It didn't matter from who. He needed emotional stability afforded by marriage. It didn't matter from who. She was, maybe still is, having an affair with someone else who just so happens to be one of her teachers from high school. He knows and doesn't care. They got married anyway, and it was awkward because only the friends of the couple knew what was actually going on. Here's the kicker. The bride specifically requested that the DJ play Panic at the disco's I Write Sins, Not Tragedies. Story 15? I wasn't going to comment, but honestly, after reading these comments, I realized how truly special my uncle's redneck wedding was. Some notable things about the redneck wedding. To host the wedding in my uncle's backyard, they had to spend about an hour that morning, though the wedding was planned for months, moving rusted-out car parts out of the way. And by out of the way, I mean from the backyard to the front yard and then covering them with a tarp. The entire backyard was dotted with massive patches of dead grass now, but nobody seemed to mind. A yard sale was happening next door simultaneously, which many of the guests made purchases at, including myself. $4 lava lamp. Couldn't resist. The inside of the house was so disastrous, none of the adult guests set foot in it. I and some of the other younger guests made a game of seeing who could tolerate the stench inside the house longest. Nobody lasted a full minute. There was literally garbage covering every surface with paths cut through the trash for movement. The garbage was so high it reached the bottom of the Christmas tree, which was still up in July. Predicting the state of the house, one of the guests' donations to the potluck-style wedding dinner was a porta-potty. God is my witness, this man arranged to have a porta-potty brought into the bride and groom's backyard so the other guests wouldn't have to deal with the filth of the house, and nobody objected to that or thought it out of place at all. Other contributions to the potluck dinner include weenies and beans, slices of bologna with Kraft singles rolled up and stuck with a toothpick as hors d'oeuvres, and 2 buckets of KFC chicken. Most of the bridesmaids had those sitting walker things like this. All were morbidly obese. One had an oxygen tank. All were smoking cigarettes. The grooms all wore their nicest ball caps during the ceremony. The bride and groom didn't have a full set of teeth between them. At one point during the ceremony, the bride's brother gave us all a special surprise, which consisted of him using some sort of explosives to fire tiny plastic weights tied to Canada flag parachutes into the air. When I asked why he did this, I was told they're Canada flags, at which point all confusion dissipated. The dinner and reception were held at the local Legion, essentially a bar for old people, specifically veterans. Not sure if other nations have something similar. There were 6 rascal scooters parked outside the Legion when I got there. The bartender didn't pour drinks. He handed patrons a plastic cup with liquor in it and pointed them at the pop dispenser, also putting any change from drink orders directly into his tip jar. Honestly, there was a bunch more weird crap from that wedding. This is just the stuff off the top of my head. I've been to some very nice redneck weddings, but this was not one of them. Story 16. I wouldn't call him a friend, but a guy I knew for a long time was always a shut-in and a pathological liar. He would lie about anything, and Everything from having his own apartment 2 cities over to his dad giving him a $100,000 on his 20th birthday. Everyone knew he was a liar, but we just sort of ignored it. He had his normal days where he was tolerable. Anyway, he came out to the bars with us, which was rare, one night, and ended up hooking up with this bat-crap crazy girl who was sitting out on the bar's balcony by herself. She got hammered and came inside where we were playing pool and started barfing everywhere. Long story short, he got her pregnant and decided to marry her. His parents were wealthy and pretty upset with the ordeal because this chick was completely off her rocker. They paid for the wedding anyway, and it went as follows. Front yard of a trailer with chain-linked fence is where the wedding was. They had a plastic altar. It had just rained, so the ground was like quicksand. They had cheap metal chairs, so fat people everywhere were sinking into the ground. They rented a golden corral chocolate wonderfall that people kept tripping over and turning off, resulting in a big old doo-doo-looking mountain. The only bridesmaid was also the DJ with a fully equipped iPad and some $10 computer speakers that were also sinking into the mud. As they walked down the makeshift aisle of swamp tears, they rick-rolled us. There was no alcohol, but his mother was loaded, crying, and utterly defeated the entire day. I think that was about everything. Since then, they had another kid. We bumped into them randomly at a Ren festival where he told me she had went to England for 2 months or so to bang a dude she met online. She told him she was leaving him and wanted nothing to do with the 2 kids, so this was her last time to see them. Since then, they are apparently back together. Her Facebook status is still showing as single, but they live together, so maybe it's working out. Story 17. It was in a public park, which in itself is not an issue at all. The reception was in a small shelter house that was made of cinder brick and was basically a room attached to 2 bathrooms. 2 public park bathrooms with all the atmosphere you'd expect in such a place. The wedding was right outside the latrine shelter house and consisted of the bride's mother ordering us all, while waving her arms like a maniac conductor, to hum, "Here Comes the Bride." The reception after was deli sandwiches. Again, on its own, not an issue. With Boone's Farm wine to make toasts. Except if you wanted some, it was $1. Yeah, story 18. A woman friend needed a date for her sister's wedding. Chivalry and all, I go with her. I had met the sister, and sorry, but she's as dumb as a mud puddle. And she is Einstein compared to the groom. They had written their own vows. Bride goes first. A bunch of spacey, love on a cosmic astral plane stuff that makes no sense at all. It really is a bad version of a 60s hippie acid trip. No continuity. Absolutely weird. Groom starts his vows. It was basically, "I really love you" stuff. Not too bad until the end. His big joke finish was, "Tas, yeah, till fat do us part." It was supposed to be the big laugh. He stood there with a big grin, waiting for the laugh. Dead, horrified, silence. Bride and groom walk down the aisle, bride's mascara streaming down her cheeks from crying. Bride's mother red-faced with fury. At the reception, the mother gets stupid drunk. Bride is going from one person to the next, apologizing for everything. Groom is whooping it up, having a good old time, oblivious to everything. Woman I'm with was deeply embarrassed, then finally had enough drinks in her to start chuckling a little bit. Story 19. The time I went to a shotgun wedding. This is kind of long, so here's the backstory. I grew up in a small rural town, population 1,155 according to Google. Because the town was so small, everyone was familiar with just about everyone else. Sometimes you hated people, sometimes you became friends. That's how I became friends with the groom. We'll call him Tony. Tony and I went to school together, but he was about 3 years older than me and 3 grades ahead. He was a nice enough kid, a little slow at times, but he meant well. He was raised very Christian and was deeply devout, at least until he graduated and moved away. I didn't see him much after that until the summer of my senior year, when he randomly showed up at my house and told me he was getting married. I congratulated him and asked when the wedding was. He said it was in 2 days. That's when things got weird. He then asked me to be a groomsman in his wedding. That immediately raised some red flags. We were friends, but not that good of friends. In a normal situation, I would have been surprised just to get an invitation, but this was clearly not a normal situation. I was hesitant at first, but I figured if he was asking me to stand up in wedding, he must really need the help. I wasn't doing anything else, so I thought, screw it. Why not? Fast forward about an hour, and I found myself in a rundown shack in the middle of nowhere. This is where I met the bride, Lizzie, and her parents. Lizzie was a girl with a heart of gold and the face of a jackal. This was also when I learned that she was pregnant, but the revelations did not stop there. I also learned that she was underage, either 15 or 16. It turned out she had gotten pregnant, and her parents found out. Her father tracked down Tony and told him that since Lizzie was pregnant, he had 2 options: marry her or have the cops called. Since the idea of prison was a massive turnoff, Tony chose marriage. This was the beginning of the most redneck wedding I have ever attended. The wedding party was small. There was one best man and one maid of honor, which was standard. Beyond that, there were two groomsmen and two bridesmaids because the wedding was so last minute, only about 10 to 15 people were in attendance. The ceremony went about as smoothly as it could. They exchanged vows and were pronounced husband and wife. This is the part where, if it were a romantic movie, the happy couple would run out to a limo and laugh together as they drove away from the church, dreaming about their future. Unfortunately, this was not a movie. There was no laughing and there was no limo. Instead, there was a 1984 Chevy S10. Tradition dictated that someone drive the newlyweds around, and since there was not enough room in the cab, 2 bales of hay were placed in the bed of the truck for them to sit on. The church was in the middle of nowhere, and the reception was in the middle of town about 10 miles away. They rode in the back of that truck for roughly 3 miles of country roads, 6 miles of highway, and 1 mile through town. By the time we reached the reception, the bride's hair was completely destroyed by the wind, making her look like Animal from the Muppets. By this point, I was furious. I had to drive the maid of honor and the 2 bridesmaids to the reception. It would not have been too bad except they were all about 16, laughing and screaming about petty BS that only 16-year-old girls care about. I decided to cut my losses and end the crap show. I dropped the girls off, made up an excuse about needing to help someone, wished them luck, and left. As far as I know, they are still married to this day. They have 4 kids, with a 5th on the way. Story 20. My best friend married a very pushy bridezilla, and I was the best man. At the rehearsal dinner, she tried to shave my head because my hair was distracting people from her. It wasn't even an unusual hairstyle. I had my hair in a shoulder-length ponytail because my fiancé had asked me to grow it out for our wedding, which was apparently one of her lifelong dreams. Who dreams of marrying a man with a ponytail? Either way, that did not sit well with the bride. The wedding itself wasn't too bad, but the bride was absolutely intolerable. During the reception, the wedding party was allowed to get food first, and they had an excellent caterer doing incredible barbecue. The bride got to the tri-tip first, grabbed a bottle of ketchup, and dumped it all over the entire tray because that's how she liked it. Then came the speeches. She let her maid of honor give her full speech without interruption. When it was my turn, she started yelling, "This is boring, let's dance," over and over again until it was clear she wasn't going to stop. I cut my speech short to keep my friend from getting chewed out later, and the dancing started. Her best friend was on the dance floor having fun and not really caring how she looked, when bridezilla stormed over and started screaming at her for ruining the dancing. After that, she locked herself in the bathroom and refused to come out for hours. I talked to my best friend, and he told me it was probably best if I left. A couple of weeks later, I was helping him with some work around his house when bridezilla came out and said, "Thanks for ruining my wedding. I should bill you for the therapy I'm going to now." Things only got worse for my best friend over the 5 years they were married. By the end, if he spoke to any of his friends, she would start a 3-day argument about how he was not dedicated enough to her. The final straw was on his birthday. She took him out to dinner, then left him at the restaurant because he got a text from his dad wishing him a happy birthday. He waited 2 hours before someone could come pick him up. Never stick your dong in crazy. Story 21. This was this past summer in Mississippi. My girlfriend's aunt was getting married for the 3rd time to the cousin of her second husband, who I'm pretty sure was in jail at the time. The location was one of those roadside churches you pass by in southern states. We arrived 5 minutes before the event only to find out the bride wasn't there yet and was still getting ready in her hotel room. When she did pull up in her sister's car, she quickly put out her cigarette and rushed into a private room to put her veil on. The wedding then began. It was a small service and lasted about 30 minutes, including 3 separate times where a different country love song, not sure which, would be played over the PA system, and the bride and groom would just stare at each other awkwardly. When the service was finally over, we convened to the church's kitchen for boxes of Walmart fried chicken and Mountain Dew. Story 22. I used to work for a lighting design and production company, and every now and then, a couple would contact us to handle their ceremony or reception. One couple reached out for their reception, and things got weird almost immediately. The first thing the bride requested was for us to project an image of Barney, the purple friggins' dinosaur, on the wall. We obliged and asked her to send over the image she wanted. The day before the wedding, she finally responded with what I can only describe as a 64 by 64 pixel picture of someone's phone, with Barney on the screen. After I explained that we needed an actual image, she got annoyed and scrapped the idea altogether. As we were loading the truck, my boss handed me literally 2 lights. For a normal event like this, we would bring 40 to 50. At that point, I thought, okay, this is going to be an easy day. Nope. When I arrived at the venue, if you can even call it that, imagine the crappiest event hall you can think of, like a VFW or Elks Lodge. Now make it half the size, 50 years older, completely run down, and dropped right in the middle of the frigging ghetto of New Jersey. Once I finally set up my 2 lights in the 5x5 room where the reception was being held, the groom's brother showed up and informed me that he would be the DJ. At first I thought, okay, maybe he has proper equipment and knows what he's doing. He did not. He did not know how to set anything up, did not know how to wire it, and did not know the software. Eventually, the party started and the DJ immediately began blasting music at a deafening volume. I hid with my control board as far behind him as I could because I already cannot stand overblown bass-heavy music. But this was a special kind of hell. Even as far away and behind the speakers as possible, my clothes were literally vibrating all night. I felt like I had constant pins and needles from the bass alone. About 2 hours into the 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. reception, another classic sign of a trash wedding, I decided to get a drink. Since we were not allowed to drink on the job, I went for a water, or maybe a cranberry juice, just to pretend and hope the placebo effect would make the night more bearable. That is when I learned it was a cash-only bar, and they had been instructed by the couple to charge the vendors as well. I paid $4 for a glass of straight cranberry juice and retreated back to my station. Eventually, they announced that they were finally going to serve food, despite it being 11 p.m., and that there would be an open bar for 30 minutes. No more than that. When you work events like this, you usually say, hey, we're here hours before the party starts and hours after it ends. Can you provide food for the crew? 9 times out of 10, people say no problem. These people said yes. But when I went to the back to get my food, the bride told me absolutely not, that I was not allowed to eat, despite it being agreed to in the contract. Eventually, the groom stepped in and explained that they had already agreed I could eat something. He brought me a plate of what looked like whatever the hell was in the fridge, like a crappy lean cuisine someone had pre-chewed. I figured whatever, they clearly did not care at least. They gave me something, until I realized that was exactly what the entire party was being served. And during that 30-minute open bar, I have never seen so many people get so utterly wasted in my life. Guests were asking for regular drinking glasses filled with straight hard liquor, and the bartenders were going right along with it, filling the glasses all the way to the top. At that point, the entire reception was walking around with 20-ounce pint-style glasses full of cheap vodka, rum, tequila, and whatever other crap liquor they had. The rest of the night played out like any other trashy club wedding. Loud, crappy music for the next couple of hours and sloppy, drunk dancing. Finally, 1 a.m. rolled around, and it was over. I gathered up the little bit of equipment I had and started loading it into my truck. When I went back inside to double-check that I hadn't left anything behind, I saw almost the entire party taking turns vomiting on the dance floor, then standing back, up and going right back to talking. Absolutely drunk. I have never seen anything like it. I finally got the hell outside, only to find the bride, groom, and DJ in front of my truck, vomiting all over it. By then, I was furious. I could not leave because they were so drunk I could not even reason with them, and my truck was now covered in puke. Eventually, they stumbled away, and I was finally able to drive my puke-covered truck back to our building and tell my boss to never, ever take another event for those people again. Story 23. This was recent. A friend got married to a Vietnamese woman. He mentioned offhand that he had to be careful with how much liquor he supplied to the wedding, because apparently her side of the family has some issues with drinking. What I didn't realize this meant was that, 1, the father of the bride didn't show to the reception because of a personal emergency. He was just drunk. 2, the brother of the bride showed up in a vinyl jacket and jeans, proceeded to get fall down drunk off maybe 1/4 of a bottle of brandy, dude was maybe 120 pounds, and attempted to essay several of the groomsmen. It wasn't redneck trashy, but damn if he wasn't kidding about the drinking problem. Story 24. My cousin's daughter's wedding, hands down. They had it at a rundown VA hall where the door opened to the street separated by only a sidewalk. That was kept open all night so you could hear cars whizzing by the entire time. There was no catering or food service, it was food people brought in crockpots and stuff. There was no rhyme or reason, and everyone rushed the tables at once, including the bride and groom, outdoor casual picnic style. That wouldn't have been too bad, but there wasn't nearly enough for everyone, so some people got little or nothing. There was no DJ or even a sound system, so my uncle just played music on some tinny portable radio thing. It was horrible. I don't even remember if there was a photographer or anything, or even cake, to be honest. I completely understand keeping weddings on the down low price-wise, but damn, I don't think the couple made it a year either, so it was a waste for all involved. Story 25. I'm a wedding videographer and have been to my fair share of weddings over the last few years. Haven't seen any insane crap shows, but one was cringy as hell. This couple was able to have their wedding in the backyard of a mansion. The groom was the top accountant for the owner. It was by far the most impressive-looking wedding we ever did. The yard alone cost $50,000 in upkeep. The ceremony was fine, and the reception was inside a golf club resort. Inside, the bar was in a separate room from where the reception was held. After speeches and dinner, the entire wedding party, including the bride and groom, went to the bar and never left. They never went around to talk to any of the guests, but just sat at the bar the rest of the evening. My partner and I had no idea what to film, because everyone just looked bored and confused in the reception. It was a huge screw you to all their guests. Story 26. My mom brought me as a +1 to a distant relative's wedding. We arrived 10 minutes before the wedding, and somehow the venue was not ready yet. The bride and a few of the bridesmaids were at the front trying to oversee the wedding plans. She sees my mom and me enter the venue and looks a little taken aback, then starts yelling in our direction, but to her friends. My mom decided to be the better person and console the bride by guiding her back to a private room and gave me looks that said, "Help the people here." I didn't know what to do, so I went to a few guys who were setting up the chairs. Turns out the bride was some sort of control freak and did not let the guys do their work. She approved their style of arrangement, etc., but didn't agree on the methods, whatever that meant. The bride's family had also spent a crap ton of money on the wedding, but it looked like they hadn't. It was somewhere in between gaudy and poorly executed. There were flowers being carted in randomly, flowers being packed away, loads of weird crystal bits just hanging around. The wedding started 2 hours late and had a traditional side, a nod to the bride's culture, and a more modern side, a nod to the bride's ego. There were no pauses because the entire thing was chaotic, and everyone just kept looking at their watches. Suddenly, the bride leaves midway for an outfit change, which took close to an hour. When she was about to show up, they dimmed the lights, but it was broad daylight in a place with large open windows, so she came through the door, took a look at the hall, and walked out. Her cronies and minions then scuttled around trying to pull in all the shades, walk her up to the place she got married, and tried, as discreetly as they could manage, to let light back into the hall. It was just piss-poor planning. So they then got married and started walking out into the restaurant. It turns out she hadn't booked enough tables or catering for all the guests and had just assumed that all the guests who ticked vegetarian wouldn't turn up. This included my mom and me. The parents of the bridegroom, who invited us, were so mortified because they had invited a lot of guests who were vegetarians. So a bunch of us, about 20 out of 200, ended up waiting in the lobby for a private lunch of salad, juice, and toast. We were then served a dessert of fruit. Apparently, the bride had only ordered enough cake for 10 people, just the top tiers out of a 9-tier elaborate cake. I kept insisting that we leave, but my mom insisted that she stay until the end because she wanted to give her gift to the groom in private. He was her student, and she was very fond of his parents. We went in to find out that the bride had temporarily paused the wedding, and the whole bridal party was missing. We waited for 45 minutes, but it seemed like they weren't returning. My mom finally got tired of waiting and gave her gift to the bridegroom's parents instead of handing it to the gift table at the corner of the room. As we were leaving, we caught the bride and the bridegroom. It turns out she had another outfit change and was insistent on taking some pictures before going back in for the rest of the festivities. My mom just congratulated them and told them that she had to leave. At this point, the wedding was running about 3 hours behind. The next day, my mom gets a text from an anonymous person asking in terms of the bride and bridegroom if she had attended. They then queried why my mom hadn't left a gift. My mom told them that there must be a mistake and that she had left a gift. This turned into a text battle of sorts, with my mom insisting that she had left a gift, didn't need to go around asking her friends, the bridegroom's parents, if they had passed the gift to the bride's family, and that she did. Not feel. It was polite to state the value of the gift. My mom had waived a loan she gave the bridegroom for tuition on top of giving them more cash. Later, I get a call from the bride. My phone number was used to verify the RSVP, asking if I had attended and given a gift. I said no. The bride then queried about my mom's gift, and I told her I had no idea. I passed the phone to my mom. Turns out in that conversation, the bride told her the expected amount of monetary value she expected my mom to present based on the amount of money the bride had spent on putting together a special experience for all the guests. I had only seen my mom explode several times, and I knew the signs. I just took the phone and ended the call. I sent the bridegroom a text explaining what had gone on and asked him to get the wedding gift from his parents. They divorced 2 weeks later. Story 27. I was the maid of honor. Groom-to-be lost his job about 9 months before the wedding, so they ended up moving in with his parents. Then they decided to have the whole wedding at his parents' estate, which was over an hour from any named town. Even though my friend had moved well over 3 hours away from me, I still made every attempt to help with decorations, food, planning, etc. My friend brushed off all of my attempts, saying that it was all covered. Day of the wedding arrives. Nobody had bothered to tell any guests coming from a northern direction that a bridge was closed, leading to nearly everyone being around 45 minutes late to both the rehearsal and the wedding. I arrived carrying my approximately $200 dress that the bride had insisted on, to the unwelcome sight of the groom's party wearing jeans, white shirts, one t-shirt, even, work boots, and a pistol. My boyfriend took our food and my clothes inside while I did the whole rehearsing thing, only to come back out looking vaguely sick with my mother in tow. My dad was the preacher for this thing. It turns out that nobody had bothered cleaning the house. No sweeping, no dusting, no cleaning out the dirty dishes from the sink next to where the food was supposed to be laid out. The only decorations were the dust bunnies all over the floor and the overfull litter boxes spilling their contents in every bathroom. My mom and boyfriend set to work after explaining the situation and fighting with the groom's mother to find a broom and some rags, and I set to work on the bride. Again, everyone was late to the wedding, but it didn't matter because the groom decided that he wanted a haircut as he was walking out of the house to go wait on the bride. So everything was delayed by a further 40 minutes while he took his uniformly long hair and created a style that can only be compared to Sokka from Avatar. Further, he stopped in to inform the bride that he didn't want any music played during her walk down the aisle. Rather, he wanted to watch her walk down to the sounds of nature, which turned out to be two of their dogs boning. Finally, the wedding is over and we all make our way back into the house for the potluck, grill, and cake. But nobody had bothered to heat up the grill, and all of the food that didn't have a lid was crawling with flies. The cake looked like it was dotted with chocolate chips from a distance, which was quite lovely until you realized they were moving. My friend later wondered aloud why nobody had stayed for more than an hour, or why we wouldn't take home any leftovers. Story 28. Small-town Wisconsin wedding. The bride's dress was off-rack, untailored, and showed off all her cheap, scratch tattoos. The ceremony itself was a crap show. The flowers were plastic and from the dollar store, and half the groomsmen were either high as a kite or so hungover they were still drunk from the night before. The reception was in the back room of the local bar, and after the ceremony, the mother of the groom asked me and another one of the groomsmen's girlfriends to go decorate the venue. We had less than an hour to make this dirty, dark room presentable with plastic tablecloths, paper streamers, and glow sticks. The food was Walmart fried chicken, biscuits, and instant mashed potatoes. The bride got smashed, but the groom had to stay sober because he had to drive them to their honeymoon flight, which left at 3 a.m. and was at an airport almost 3 hours away. Story 29. Not exactly trashy, but just odd. My cousin's wedding was held in Maryland. The bride was Catholic, and the wedding was held in her church, so it was longer than most weddings I've been to since I'm not Catholic. Additionally, the bride's uncle was the priest. That becomes relevant later. The wedding itself was fine, but during the service there was a reception for another wedding going on at the same time, in the basement of the same church, complete with DJ'd music. Literally the exact moment that the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," the DJ started playing Roll. Out the barrel. The bride's mother was pissed. She canceled her membership in the church that day, and to this day, about a quarter of a century later, the family is still not on speaking terms with Uncle Priest. Story 30. I didn't go to this wedding. You'll see why in a minute. But one of my coworkers, who I barely knew, invited the whole department to her engagement party. On the invite, they mentioned that weddings are expensive, so they would like cash gifts. That should have been my first clue, but I stuffed $25 into a card and attended. The venue was packed to full capacity, and it was a cash bar. Next, all the women in the department were invited to her wedding shower. I had a conflict that weekend, so I picked a nice but economical towel set from the gift registry and gave that to her at work. Her response? "Oh, how nice. You know, you don't have to get just one thing from the registry." At that point, I was done. When the invitation to the actual wedding rolled around, I was probably more surprised than I should have been. At the bottom of the invite, there was a note that said there would be a $60 cover charge for each guest. I immediately RSVP'd no, and apparently so did a lot of the invited guests. According to one saintly coworker who was actually friends with the bride, the happy couple dropped the cover charge idea after receiving very strong backlash from their families. Instead, they created another registry and picked really expensive items with the intention of returning them for cash later. Story 31. I was going to reply to a comment about a redneck wedding I officiated, but I realized that the amount of details I have might be better off as its own post. I marry people as a hobby. I don't charge, I just accept donations. Obviously, I've done a handful of weird or normal weddings for family, friends, and strangers that those people know. But this particular wedding, the bride and groom had a camo dress and camp. Tux, respectively, with black trim. The wedding party's outfits had the reverse scheme, all black with camo trims. They had asked me to dress in camo as well. I grew up in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, and didn't see use for any purchase of camo attire. I ended up wearing some blue jeans, a pair of hiking boots. They wanted the ceremony in the middle of a field near an abandoned farm, a hunter's green shirt, and a cowboy hat from my uncle. They were quite happy with the outfit. Meanwhile, I got there and found out that the bride-to-be had broken her leg riding a mechanical bull for her bachelorette party and would be on crutches for the whole ceremony. She had someone bring me over to her pre-ceremony and politely asked me to cut the ceremony in half while she was chain-smoking more than one cigarette at once. Unsure of what parts to cut, only my second wedding performance ever, I just started randomly cutting parts that seemed unimportant. Well, the big moment came, and the ceremony begins. And here comes the bride, riding on the back portion of a John Deere gator. Nice people, though. Kind of weird. Story 32, the royal pizza wedding. A work friend and his girlfriend had been engaged for like 5 years, and during that time, couldn't manage to save up $1,400 between the two of them to have their dream wedding at a local medieval times-type place with a pizza buffet on a Wednesday morning, which they constantly referred to as the royal wedding without a hint of irony. Eventually, as it began to look like they just might have $1,400 together, the bride's father stepped in and said he'd pay for them to do literally anything else. He was against the marriage but also didn't want the pizza buffet. So they planned a wedding in a church neither attended, with the reception at the bride's dad's house. Total bridezilla. I somehow ended up in the bridal party despite the fact that she hated me, only because she had literally no other friends. We went to David's bridal, where she screamed at the woman working there about how she had $100 to spend, and they better treat her with some respect. The woman came back with a dress that would be just right, and was actually like 5 sizes too big. Ultimate passive-aggressive move. It was awesome. So, 100 other meltdowns later, we were at the rehearsal dinner at a local discount pizza buffet place because apparently that was a deal breaker. The night was tense as both families clearly thought the other was trash. Hint, they're both right. And as everyone was leaving, a full-on parking lot brawl erupted between the two families after the bride punched the groom in the face in front of the priest. Next day, I was sure this thing wasn't happening and was excited for an unexpected free Saturday. Turns out it still was. Literally everyone in both families, including the bride and groom, had black eyes. Haven't spoken to any of them since, but I've heard the divorce was just as spectacular. Story 33. My sister and I tag-teamed for a while with weddings. She's a professional photographer, and I am a semi-professional baker. This wedding made me refuse to ever do another wedding, and has forced her to become very selective. The bride was a friend of a friend and a 7-month pregnant bridezilla who wanted to get married on a hill in a quaint little town of no significance, so we gave them a deal. The budget was small, so she only wanted my sister for the ceremony in 4 hours of the reception. I, on the other hand, had to make the 3-hour drive with 400 cupcakes and a small cake bright and early at 6 a.m. As a result, my sister came with me. Let's backtrack a few weeks. I had advised the bride that the white chocolate angel food cake with a very specific brand of raspberry jam filling she wanted would not be stable enough to hold the heavy porcelain angel cake toppers, which looked like they came straight out of her grandma's figurine collection. I was advised to shut that faux up and make what I was being paid to make. The cupcakes had to be iced in their favorite football team colors of black and yellow because everyone wants a lovely black-toothed smile at a wedding. The invitations had the reception listed at a hotel. I'd been trying to confirm this location for weeks with the wedding party, but never got a straight answer. We arrived at the hotel, which was more of a colonial inn. The hotel had no idea what the deal was with the reception, but assured me the bridal party was upstairs and I could go find them. My sister and I found a room no bigger than about 6 by 6 feet, stuffed with 8 bridesmaids, a makeup artist, a hairdresser, the mothers of the bride and groom, the bride, 2 flower girls, and about 4 other random family members. It felt like entering hell. It was so hot. The bride began to snap at my sister for being late, and after some arguing and exchanging of cash, my sister finally conceded to squeezing into the room to try to take pictures since she had nothing better to do. I found out the reception had been moved to the same hill as the ceremony, since there was an indoor picnic shelter there. Naturally, when I assembled the Tower of Awful, the angels started to crush the small cake within minutes. Thankfully, I had brought extra icing, which I used to fill in the holes, and sat the angels on the table in front of the cake. This later prompted death glares from the bride, who tried to stack the angels on top of the cake unsuccessfully before her groom removed them. It was a super windy day, and the hill was a steep incline. As people sat down, some of them were actually tipping backwards out of their chairs. I opted to stand, as did many guests after a while, which made it really fun for my sister to take pictures. Most of the guests were in jeans and sweatshirts. The bride wore tennis shoes, and apparently it was planned from the start for her and the whole wedding party to have matching running shoes. These were like gray and blue Walmart New Balances or something. They looked awful and didn't match the yellow and black at all. Even though they were advised not to light the unity candles due to the wind, they insisted. Rather than blowing out the candles, they were blown over, which caught the flimsy card table and the grass on fire. Luckily, some guys who wore work boots to the wedding managed to stomp it out. The reception was catered by a local diner, which served everything cafeteria style out of tinfoil trays and wore their classiest diner uniforms to do so. They ran out of food before even half the guests were fed. The DJ was the bride's 12-year-old brother with his iPod and a portable speaker. My sister started to feel sick about halfway into the ceremony, so when the reception passed the 5-hour mark, she was ready to leave or die. The bride finally agreed to do the first dance, and the father-daughter dance? Yes, 5 hours in, with only about 20 guests left, all of whom danced. This prompted a mother-son dance, a mother-daughter dance, son-in-law, mother-in-law dance, sibling dance, grandparents dance, cousins dance, stepfather-daughter dance, stepmother son-in-law dance, mother-in-law daughter-in-law dance, father-in-law daughter-in-law dance, and the bridemaid of honor dance. Yeah, it was weird, but 2 hours later we finally left. And thankfully we're both given huge $300 tips from the family who saw the hell we went through. Story 34, ex-boyfriend's aunt is getting remarried to the nephew of her ex-husband. I begrudgingly tag along, only to find out that we're heading into the nearby rundown neighborhood, the one across the tracks. We enter into this house, and there's a makeshift arch in the living room surrounded by a ton of lawn chairs, leaving a pathway to what I figured out was the backyard. The arch would be the only decoration. Halfway through the ceremony, my ex leans in to tell me that they went and got the old pastor out of the nursing home to perform the service because he was a good family friend, disregarding the fact that he had dementia and might, I don't know, forget how everything goes. After that was done, the couple made a short walk into the backyard, while we all tried to file into the kitchen and dining room to wait for them to walk back in. The homemade sandwich platter looked decent enough, but the fog of cigarette smoke kind of killed my appetite. Oh, I didn't mention that no one quit smoking through this entire ordeal? Yeah, they didn't. I must add at this point that these weren't poor, lovely souls. They were ex-chalk current meth heads and drug users, and there were more than enough attendees to contribute to the my craziest time in jail talk. The groom also had a decent job, but they were always squandering their money somehow. Cough, drugs, cough, leaving them broke until the next payday. It was like something out of a biography of the Great Depression, except this was 2015. Story 35. Someone I knew got married to a guy whose family lived in the middle of nowhere and was super religious. She told me about the wedding and when it was, but I never got an invitation. She said she had sent it. I am 100% convinced her in-laws intercepted invitations for people they didn't want to come. I went anyway and drove several hours to get there, only to find out I was not invited to the reception because it was for family only. The bride walked down the aisle in a used dress with noticeable stains on it. In her vows, she pledged to be subservient to her husband. After the wedding, I ended up getting invited to the reception anyway because so few people were going. But I ditched and drove several hours home to get away from that backwards town. The couple divorced not long after, and that woman is now married to a much better, sane dude. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.